Welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears. We're back with my 1989 Honda Prelude. So you can see I've got it on the ground, and that's because I've actually made a whole lot of progress for this car. I am on the home stretch as far as the work that I have planned to do. However, I'm still waiting on the panel clips for my fender liners, and those are going to take probably 2 more weeks. So in the meantime, I'm going to do the oil pan gasket, and I'm also just probably going to take a break and work on my house a little bit. We got a heat wave coming up next week, so I kind of want to get some things in order before it becomes like 100 million degrees. So you see out back, we're gonna do some work on the side of my house. I actually need to run electricity from the main house to the garage so that I can finally have lights in here, especially once I get doors and windows. So that's what I'm actually mainly going to be working on this weekend. But for now, I've put the car down so that I can move it out and clean the floor, because if I'm going to be underneath it doing the oil pan gasket, I want a clean floor. So you can see under the hood, my hood prop is in the car, I believe, so I'm using this broomstick for now. I've filled up the coolant, I've bled the coolant system, I've installed the intake, and I got my filter, and it fits really nicely along with the distribution block and the new power setup. Everything works, the car starts and runs. I haven't driven it yet, and I don't think I'm going to drive it until I get fenders and a bumper. I know how it drives, so I really don't need to go driving around all ghetto like this. And the interior, I've got the interior all back together. I even vacuumed it for the first time in a while. Back seats back in. All the floors are done. It actually looks a little bit cleaner because I had some wires that were sticking out, just kind of exposed, like for the some of the stereo components. So I was able to tuck those away into the seats. You can see I've still got a few odds and ends to sort out on the dashboard, just little bolts and clips here and there. Some of the stuff I need, some of the stuff I actually don't need. So I'll be addressing that just kind of as I go. And while I may not drive it on the street, I certainly want to drive it looking so nice the way it does. I always love the day that I clean a car out. It looks so good. And then I've got the wires all hidden. I still got like the little covers and stuff that I have to put on the seat hardware. That's not a big deal. And we've already looked at the trunk from the other angle, but this is what it looks like from inside the car. I am actually going to replace the trunk cylinder, the pop solenoid, because the one I have is a little worn out, I think. I think it's just ready to go. So I'm going to replace that, and hopefully my trunk will pop open nicely when I press the button after that. But the battery is nice and secure. It's more secure than it was in the front of the car. I'm really happy with how things turned out back here. So this is how I know that I have an oil leak, because I should not have spots of oil under the car. I did mop those once and they came back, so that means I have an active leak. And it's definitely coming from the oil pan gasket, as well as possibly the drain plug itself. So I'm going to go ahead and, once I clean up the floor, bite the bullet and take care of all that. Now I've got the Prelude back up on the stands. I'm getting ready to drain the oil. I'm going to start doing the oil pan gasket job. We don't have any evidence of leak on the floor because I had cardboard down here overnight. But you do see a little bit of seepage. Oops, that was my hand. You do see a little bit of seepage on the drain plug, as well as in the in the gasket itself. The gasket's weeping. I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. It's going to require dropping this bar between the front cross member and subframe. It's also going to require dropping the header down pipe, both up here. It's a two-piece header, so it comes apart underneath the first piece and just in front of the catalytic converter. I can drop that out, set that aside, and then I believe it's this cover on the transmission also comes off to expose the bolts back there. I've done this before, so I know it's miserable, but the reason that this is going to be different than any other time I've done it is because this is my garage, this is my floor, and my floor is clean. I've never done a oil pan gasket on a clean floor before, so maybe things will be a lot different this time around. Well, I spent a few minutes underneath the car, and I was wrong. Working underneath the car on the floor, I don't care if it's a brand new garage, I don't care if it's a clean floor, it is every bit as miserable as I remember it ever being. So first of all, I don't have any light, so it was pretty dark. I had to use my flashlight to see what I was doing. You see here I made quite a bit of a mess of oil on the floor, and that's because the oil filter was stuck from being on there for 1.5 years, so I had to drive a screwdriver through it, which meant making a mess of pretty much the entire floor. So that was fun, and oil all over my arms, both arms. Yeah, so that was fun. I did drain the oil from the oil pan, replace the gasket, replace the oil filter, and I started looking at the whole situation here. So down here, the oil pan gasket isn't leaking on the front side, or it's not even wet on the front side. So it might not even be leaking, at least not on the front side. Now on the back side, you see a little bit of wetness. I've started to clean it up, but the other thing I was thinking is, yeah, there is some oil there, but I was thinking maybe if the oil was leaking from up above it, like say from the oil filter and from the seal on the cam sensor, it would run down right over here and burn up on the downpipe here, which is exactly what was happening. I also had a small leak in the drain plug washer, so I replaced that too. So and even still, I decided that even if the gasket is still leaking just a little bit, it is not leaking bad enough for me to want to change it on the floor. So I am going to just put oil in it and forget I even was considering doing the oil pan gasket. I did need an oil change anyway, so that's good. And I'm just going to put it back together, and hopefully, if I come back to do this, if I really do need to do an oil pan gasket, I'm going to try to hold out until I actually have a lift, because being on the floor is awful. I don't want to do it. Alright, so I got it topped off with oil, just about 4 quarts, maybe a little more or less, give or take. I use Royal Purple 1030. The car's supposed to use 1030. I use Royal Purple. You know, people say, oh, you're just wasting your money buying expensive oil. You're up there and putting 91 octane. You could run that thing. You know what? You know what I have to say to these guys? My car's got about 300,000 miles, and it runs like it's new. So whatever I'm doing, I'm just going to keep doing. So if I'm spending a little bit more on oil or an expensive filter or the expensive gas, you know, for this car, it's working out well for me. So the next thing that I like to do when I do an oil change is I like to crank it over a few times without actually starting it. This way it gives the oil a chance to run through the system. So I'm going to go get my keys and we're going to start this thing up. Okay, so there was a little bit of a belt squeak. That's the next thing I'm going to take care of. But that's usually what I do for an oil change. I'll crank it over just a little bit just to make sure that we got fresh oil cycling through, fills up the oil filter and all that stuff. That way it doesn't run for like a full 30 seconds with the oil pressure light on. We're going to find out which belt is squealing. It could be really either one of these. Alternator belt feels tight. It could be the power steering belt. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that. We're going to try this again. Okay, finally. That was not the most fun I've ever had, I have to admit. Adjusting belts on this car is not all that much fun. So the first things first, I have to unbolt the cruise control module and move it out of the way. It's not that big of a deal, but it is annoying after you've put the whole car back together. And then these bolts, well, for one, the power steering tensioner, the bolt that goes through that, it's made out of paper mache. So you can't just throw a box end on it. You actually have to put the round side all the way around it in order to get a grip on it, or else you just round it out. So you can see I started to round it out right there. Come on, focus. Anyway, the tensioner, and then to get to the tensioner itself, you have to run this long contraption through the side of the headlight to scratch the paint, obviously. And it's really hard to see, but it's way down here to get at the tensioner, which is, where the hell is it? Here. There you are. Right there. That's the tensioner below the alternator, behind the idler. It's really hard to get to. You have to use 12 millimeter, the flexi elbow, and then a couple extensions, and then the bolt to loosen, to tension the alternator is underneath the alternator. It's also really hard to get at. I had to replace that bolt because obviously I rounded it out a long time ago, and so now I'm using a 13 millimeter deep socket with a hand ratchet because I can't get any other tool in there. It's too short just to put the socket on, but if you put an extension on, it becomes too long. So the only real way is to get the ratchet with the deep socket, and then you have like 2 clicks worth of room to loosen that thing, which is great. And then the adjustment nut itself is down below the charge cable, right there, right in front of the camera. I had to use just I'm using a 12 millimeter ratcheting wrench, that thing right there. And you have to be real careful because you could very easily touch that battery cable, and that makes for a really fun time. Not really, don't do it. Just take my word for it, don't do it. I've done it. You don't want to do it. So adjusting the belts on this car is not the most fun thing in the world, but it's done. It starts up, it doesn't squeal. Hopefully it stays that way for a good long time.